Thank you for joining us today in our Federal Government Contractors Specialty Webinar Series. We're coming to you live from Washington, D.C. First, a bit about us. We provide consulting services for established U.S. federal government contractors. You can learn more about these services on our website. We've been curating and producing complimentary webinars since 2009 and have amassed a library on YouTube of over 500 videos. The topics range from marketing and business development best practices to the rules and regulations under the FAR, and also business playbooks for each federal department. As mentioned, our YouTube channel is the main repository for housing our webinars. Please follow the channel to get alerts of new uploads on federal contracting topics. Because we reach a vast audience of federal contractors, we offer opportunities to advertise and promote your business. You can see the depth of our reach in various outlets. And please note, this fall we will be starting a new webinar series covering subcontracting opportunities in the different government departments. These webinars will be on Wednesdays at 12 p.m. Eastern and begin September 7th, yesterday, with the Department of Agriculture. You can find registration links and the full schedule on our website under the subcontracting tab. And welcome everyone again to the Federal Government Contractors Specialty Webinar Series. Today we'll be covering U.S. House Committees hearings and how they impact government contractors. And I want to thank Tim Brummelkamp for joining us today and taking the time to prepare slides for the presentation. Tim, welcome to the program. I'll mute myself now and just let me know when you're ready for the next slide.
Thanks so much, Colton. Hello, everybody. My name's Tim Brummelkamp. A little bit on my background. I have almost 30 years of experience working in the Congress or in the federal government or closely with the federal government. And today we're just going to talk about House committees and why they might be important to federal contractors. Next slide. So our agenda today is basically three parts. What are House committees? How do they impact federal agency budget programs and contracts? And how can contractors use this information? Next slide. Okay, so what do House committees do? And this probably brings you all back to 6th grade civics class. Committees are where bills are drafted, modified, and approved before they're sent to the full House of Representatives for a vote. And as they're preparing their bills for consideration, the committees hold hearings to listen to testimony from key agency officials and other subject matter experts. When they finally get to the point of drafting the bill in the committee and amending it, they call those meetings markups, and they're considered kind of the most important meetings because that's where they're actually drafting the legislation. The bulk of the committee hearings happen between the time the president submits his budget in February and October 1st, which is the start of the next fiscal year. Ideally, Congress is supposed to have all of their authorization and appropriations bills done by October 1st. But in recent years, probably over the last 15 years or so, that rarely happens. But usually October 1st is the target, and sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. But committee hearings can happen any time of the year, but really the bulk of them, I would think, happen between February and October. That's when things are most active. In addition to drafting and approving legislation, the committees also have a very important agency oversight function. And this is sometimes an overlooked activity, but it's very important. If the agencies are not doing things the way they should, Congress can call them in to testify and conduct investigations into the agencies to find out what's going on. You have to remember that the ultimate power of Congress is the power of the purse. Congress has the power to appropriate funds from the U.S. Treasury to pay for the agencies. Without Congress, the agencies would not exist. Next slide. So what are the types of House committees? And you probably won't find this list on anything on the internet or whatever, but this is the way that I kind of think about the groups of committees. First, you have the internal House committees that are used to manage the House of Representatives, and then they also have investigative committees that conduct investigations on federal agencies. So, you know, the House Administration Committee runs the House, the Rules Committee sets the rules for the House floor, Ethics Committee manages investigations into members of Congress who are breaking rules. And the Oversight and Reform Committee looks into agencies and conducts oversight. Like I mentioned earlier, that's one of their responsibilities. Then you come to the budget-related committees. Every year, Congress has to approve a general budget and then authorize all of the federal agencies and then appropriate funds to pay for everything. So you have the Budget Committee does the overall budget, Appropriations Committee, they write the checks, and then the Ways and Means Committee, they're the taxing committee, okay? All the tax bills go through the Ways and Means Committee. And then you have all the other committees, those are authorizing committees, and we'll see them here on the next list. Next slide. So here is our list of the 20 standing House committees, and there's links to each committee there. If you just want to go to a main link, you can go to house.gov/committees. That'll take you to this list of committees. But what we have here are the 20 core committees that are responsible for authorizing the entire federal government, appropriating funds for the Treasury to pay for it, and conduct oversight over all of those agencies. So those are the three tasks that are kind of being conducted by these 20 core committees. You may have heard of other committees like select committees. There's a select committee on intelligence. That's where they handle all the intelligence community work. There's a select committee on climate crisis, and you've all heard of the January 6th select committee. I didn't include those here today because if you're a federal contractor, you're really probably not concerned with those specific issues. Those committees are not authorizing agencies or appropriating funds for agencies and their programs. And as a federal contractor, you're probably most interested in agency budgets and programs and how they affect your business, right? So we're just looking at the 20 core House committees. We call them standing committees. Next slide, please. This, I think, is probably the most important slide, the most important takeaway. If you want to learn one thing today, learn about the difference between authorizing committees and appropriations committees. If you understand this concept, then you can learn all the names of committees and their jurisdictions later and understand what their roles are. Okay, so authorizing committees, they draft and approve legislation to create or continue an agency, program, or activity, as well as authorize the enactment of the appropriations. And I'm reading that specifically because it's a very specific task, right? So the agencies cannot exist unless Congress authorizes their existence, and they cannot continue unless Congress continues their authorization. So some agencies like the Department of Defense are authorized on an annual basis. Other agencies might be authorized on every 2 years or maybe every 5 years. But somewhere in Congress, there's a committee that authorizes the agency. For example, the Agriculture Committee authorizes the Department of Agriculture. I think they do a farm bill every 5 years, and that's how they get authorized. So that's what authorization is. We're authorizing their existence. Okay, so once they're authorized, you have to pay for their budget at that agency, and that's what the Appropriations Committee does. They draft and approve legislation to fund the authorized agency programs and activities. And I gave 2 examples there. In the House, there's a Committee on Armed Services that authorizes the Department of Defense through the National Defense Authorization Act. That's a bill that's passed every year. And then the House Appropriations Committee has a subcommittee on defense appropriations that passes a defense appropriations bill to fund the Department of Defense. So there's 2 types of committees. And if you, that list I just showed you of the 20 standing committees, the agency that you're concerned about is authorized by one of those standing committees. Some of them are obvious, like the Department of Veterans Affairs is authorized by the Veterans Committee. Some of them are not so obvious, and you might have to do some rooting around to figure out which committee has jurisdiction over your agency. But all of those standing committees authorize the agencies, and then the Appropriations Committee provides the funding. Next slide. So we don't have enough slide space to show you all of the subcommittees of all of the standing committees in the House. So what I did is I just provided the House Armed Services Committee list of subcommittees. And you can see that the subcommittees are divided up by topics. Okay, you got air and land forces, personnel, readiness, sea power, strategic forces, which means nuclear forces. And then you've got other things like cyber and innovative technologies, IT, and intelligence. So they just break it down by topic. And you'll see that at all of the House standing committees, they will be broken down by topics that are important to that committee. Next slide. Okay, so it's important to understand how the House committees are staffed. Remember that Congress is really broken in half. There's the majority party in the House right now, that's the Democrats, and then there's the minority party, and in the House now, that's the Republicans. That switches every few years. So when you go to a committee, you have to understand if you're talking to the majority staff or the minority staff, right? Altogether, they're going to have 50 to 60 staffers representing both sides, but the staffs work separately. You know, the majority staff will have their own offices and they will have more staff than the minority staff, right? It's usually probably maybe a 60-40 split depending on the committee. But the committee staff do a lot of different things like staff directing, committee counsel is the lawyer, they've got investigators, press people, the chief clerks, they run the committee meetings, office managers, you know, just basically manage the office, schedulers, document clerks keeping track of all the documents, and then the legislative staff take care of, you know, actually drafting and putting together the legislation that's being considered. So if you ever try to talk to committee staff, you have to understand, you know, which side are you trying to talk to, and you know, what position are you wanting to talk to, right? So next slide. What can committees do? Well, remember I talked about the power of the purse, right? That's a very powerful responsibility of the Congress. They can create, cut back, or terminate entire agencies. They can increase or decrease funding for specific programs. They can completely terminate a specific program if they want to. And they can approve new policies such as procurement rules. They can approve accompanying committee report language that provides guidance to agencies. And, you know, that is not the that's not the least of their responsibilities. That's actually a very powerful thing that the committee does. Every year when the committee passes their authorizing or appropriating bill, they always have an accompanying committee report. It's separate from the actual bill itself, and it's not a binding legislative document. It doesn't get signed into law by the president. You know, it's not a binding document, but it provides guidance and direction to the agencies, kind of like, you know, just additional notes and things that they want to tell the agency. And this is a place where a government contract can actually play a role. You could potentially get your member of Congress to insert some committee report language that highlights your offering. And that is a place where oftentimes government contractors play a role in the committee process. We'll talk more about that in a minute. Next slide. Okay, so here we are. This is kind of the grand finale. How can the government contractors use this information? Well, the way I see it, you can either do it one of two ways. You could simply track the committee activity and their legislation and to keep informed about any changes to federal programs that might affect your business. You know, let's say you're doing business with the Department of Defense and you're supporting a certain program, and then you see in the committee activity that they've doubled the funding for the program that you're working on. That might be good for your business. You know, you can inform your boss, I've been paying attention to the committee activity. They've doubled the budget for our government program that we're working on, and that's good news for us. I call that the passive approach. I think you should always be doing the passive approach because you want to be knowledgeable about what the government programs are doing and how that might affect your business, right? So simply tracking the committee activity and watching what's going on there, that's always something that you want to do. The second approach, or the second way that you can use this information, is you can be proactive and you can engage your member of Congress to help your business influence the legislative outcomes of the committees. Some of you might be thinking, wow, that sounds like we shouldn't be able to do that. You know, that's not our job. But in fact, it is. Because if you go back to your First Amendment of the Constitution, it authorizes every American to lobby your members of Congress. And I just put it here so you can read it. And the important part is it says, Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom to petition the government for a redress of grievances. So let's say you're disappointed that the Army is terminating the program that your company is supporting. Well, you can go to your member of Congress and tell him or her that. And then they can go to the committee and say, hey, don't cut that program. It's important to my constituents. If enough members of Congress and government contracts go to the, if they go to the committee and say that, well, the committee might change their mind, or they might change the Army's mind and say, we're not going to cut that program, So that's a very powerful way where any American or any government contract can play a role influencing the committee to change their mind, or not cut a program, or simply increase funding to a program. So next slide. That's what we're going to talk about next here. So these are things specifically that you can do. If you were to engage the House committees through your members of Congress, you could influence the committee to increase funding for a federal program, or you could get the committee to approve committee report language that highlights your technology or offering, or you could simply get the committee to make an inquiry on your behalf to a federal agency. So, these are proactive things where you as a government contractor can actually influence the outcome of the congressional budget for the agencies. So with that, I think that's my last slide. Colton, let's go to the next one. So that's really it for today's briefing. Those are the House committees, how they're set up, what they do, how they can impact federal budgets, and what you can do as a federal contractor to leverage that information. And I would encourage all of you to think about being more proactive in engaging your members of Congress to get them to support your business and contact the committees on your behalf. So that's all I have today, Colton. Thank you everybody for listening. I hope this was informative, and that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. That was a great overview and presentation of the topic, and we really enjoyed having you with us today. If you have any questions about today's subject matter, we highly encourage you to contact Tim. He is an expert in this field, and his contact information is on this slide right here. Thank you again to everyone who participated. Today's webinar was recorded, and you can find the recording in our YouTube channel, our website, Gov Events, and more. Registrants will receive an email with the recording and slides. And this concludes our webinar for today. Thank you.